If you thought Jay-Z was done making history, think again, because what just happened at Yankee Stadium wasn't just a concert. It wasn't just a celebration of reasonable doubt. And it definitely wasn't another nostalgia show built on old hits and memories. What unfolded over the course of 3 unforgettable nights, and especially during the chaotic, legendary extra innings finale, may have completely changed the future of hip-hop live performances forever. We're talking about a show so massive that tens of thousands of people were affected by delays, security issues, and overwhelming demand. A show that started hours late and somehow ended up feeling even bigger because of it. A show where the biggest names in music kept appearing one after another, where the crowd stayed deep into the early morning hours, and where Jay-Z proved that even after 3 decades at the top, he can still command a culture like almost nobody else. But here's where things get interesting. While fans were celebrating what many are calling one of the greatest hip-hop events ever, not everyone in the industry was cheering. Behind the scenes, this event sent a message that some artists, executives, promoters, and competitors probably didn't want to hear. Jay-Z showed that legacy acts don't have to fade away. He showed that a rapper in his mid-50s can still dominate headlines, sell out massive venues, generate worldwide attention, and create moments that stop the entire music world in its tracks. More importantly, he may have just raised the standard for what a hip-hop event is supposed to be. Bigger stages, bigger experiences, bigger cultural moments. And if that's true, then this wasn't simply a concert. It was a warning shot, a statement, a reminder. Because whether you love Jay-Z or not, what happened over those nights is everybody talking, everybody watching, and everybody wondering the same thing. Has Jay-Z just changed hip-hop history forever? Let's get into it. To understand why so many people are calling Jay-Z's recent Yankee Stadium run a historic moment, you first have to understand who Jay-Z is within the story of hip-hop itself. This isn't just a successful rapper putting on a big concert. This is one of the most influential figures the genre has ever produced, stepping back into the spotlight and reminding the world why his name continues to sit at the center of every greatest of all time conversation. For more than 3 decades, Jay-Z has been one of the defining forces in music. From his independent hustle in the mid-1990s to becoming a global business mogul, his career has mirrored the growth of hip-hop from a cultural movement into a worldwide industry. When Reasonable Doubt was released in 1996, few could have predicted that Sean Carter would eventually become one of the richest and most powerful figures in entertainment. Yet year after year, album after album, he continued to evolve while many of his peers faded away. What separates Jay-Z from most artists is not simply longevity. Many musicians stay active for decades. The difference is relevance. Throughout multiple eras of hip-hop, Jay-Z has consistently found ways to remain part of the conversation. He dominated the late 1990s, helped define the mainstream sound of the 2000s, remained influential throughout the streaming era, and even in periods when he wasn't releasing music, his presence continued to shape the culture. That history is what made his recent series of performances so important. These weren't random concerts. They were carefully designed celebrations of some of the most significant moments in his career. The event centered around classic projects that helped define generations of hip-hop fans. For longtime listeners, the shows represented a chance to relive the soundtrack of their lives. For younger fans, they offer a rare opportunity to witness an artist whose influence stretches across nearly every corner of modern rap. The anticipation surrounding performances was enormous from the beginning. Whenever Jay-Z makes a major public move, the industry pays attention. Unlike many artists who constantly remain in the public eye, Jay-Z tends to operate selectively. Long gaps between performances have created an environment where every appearance feels important. Because of that, these shows immediately became major cultural events rather than ordinary tour dates. The choice of Yankee Stadium also added another layer of significance. New York City is not just Jay-Z's hometown. It is one of the birthplaces of hip-hop itself. Performing in one of the city's most iconic venues transformed the concerts into something larger than a personal celebration. It connected Jay-Z's story with the story of New York hip-hop, a culture that helped shape modern music around the world. As the multi-night event unfolded, expectations continued to rise. The first nights generated enormous excitement. particularly because of the special guests and the deep catalog performances. Fans were already describing the experience as a once-in-a-generation celebration of hip-hop excellence. Yet what happened during the final extra innings show would elevate the conversation to an entirely different level. Before the performance even began, chaos erupted. Security concerns, crowd management issues, and delays created uncertainty throughout the venue. Thousands of people found themselves stuck outside, while others waited inside for hours without knowing exactly when the show would begin. Under normal circumstances, such problems could have completely damaged the atmosphere of an event. Instead, something unusual happened. The delay became part of the story. As the night stretched into the early morning hours, anticipation reached levels rarely seen at a live music event. By the time Jay-Z finally took the stage, the performance felt less like a scheduled concert and more like a cultural moment that everyone in attendance had survived together. The crowd was no longer simply waiting for entertainment. They were witnessing an event that already felt historic before the first song was even performed. What followed only intensified that feeling. Jay-Z delivered a marathon performance that moved through multiple eras of his career while bringing out an extraordinary lineup of guests. Legends, collaborators, and industry icons appeared throughout the night, turning the stage into a living timeline of hip-hop history. The show became a celebration not only of Jay-Z's catalog, but also of the relationships, influence, and cultural impact he has built over decades. For many observers, that is where the larger significance begins. The event wasn't important merely because it was successful. It was important because it demonstrated something that much of the music industry has underestimated. At a time when attention spans are shrinking, trends move faster than ever, and artists often struggle to maintain relevance for even a few years, Jay-Z proved that true cultural influence operates on a different level. The performances reminded audiences that legacy, credibility, and artistic excellence still carry tremendous value. They showed that a veteran artist can generate excitement equal to, or even greater than, many younger stars. Most importantly, they suggested that hip-hop may be entering a new era where its elder statesmen are no longer viewed as nostalgic acts, but as active architects of the culture's future. That is why the conversation surrounding these shows has become so intense. For some, they were simply incredible concerts. For others, they represented a shift in the balance of power within hip-hop. And if that interpretation is correct, then Jay-Z didn't just celebrate history at Yankee Stadium. He may have changed it. Everything about Jay-Z's Yankee Stadium run was supposed to be perfect. The venue was iconic. The occasion was historic. The demand was massive. Fans had traveled from across the United States and even from other countries to witness what was being promoted as one of the biggest hip-hop celebrations of the decade. On paper, there was almost no way for the event to fail. But history rarely unfolds the way people expect. And on the night of the extra innings show, what should have been a smooth victory lap for one of hip-hop's greatest legends quickly turned into a nightmare. Hours before Jay-Z would eventually take the stage, problems began building outside Yankee Stadium. Crowds were growing larger by the minute. Security checkpoints became overwhelmed. Fans who had arrived early expected to be inside the venue well before showtime, but instead they found themselves trapped in massive lines stretching across surrounding areas. At first, most people assumed it was normal concert congestion. After all, this was Jay-Z. Large crowds were expected. Delays happened. Nobody was worried. Then the situation escalated. Reports began spreading throughout the crowd that barriers had been breached. Individuals allegedly forced their way through restricted areas, creating immediate safety concerns. What started as a simple delay suddenly became a major crowd management issue. Security personnel were forced into an impossible situation. Allowing unrestricted movement could create dangerous crowd surges. Stopping entry entirely could leave thousands of legitimate ticket holders stranded outside. Neither option was ideal. As authorities worked to regain control, entry procedures slowed dramatically. Then, according to multiple accounts from attendees and statements made during the event itself, doors were effectively shut down for a period of time as organizers attempted to restore order and ensure public safety. The consequences were immediate. Thousands of people who had paid significant amounts of money for tickets suddenly found themselves unable to enter. Confusion spread. Nobody seemed to know exactly what was happening. Social media exploded with videos showing frustrated fans, growing lines, and mounting uncertainty. Inside the stadium, things weren't much better. Those who had already gained entry were now stuck waiting. Minutes turned into hours. Hours turned into an entire evening. People checked their phones, constantly searching for updates. Some worried the show might be canceled altogether. Others wondered whether Jay-Z would perform at all. The atmosphere shifted from excitement to anxiety. And with every passing minute, expectations grew heavier. This wasn't just a delay anymore. It was becoming a public relations disaster. For many artists, a situation like this could have permanently defined the event. Fans tend to remember frustration. They remember inconvenience. They remember feeling ignored. And the longer the delay continued, the more likely it seemed that this historic celebration would instead become remembered as one of the biggest logistical failures in recent concert history. Critics were already preparing their narratives. Some questioned whether the event had been oversold. Others blamed organizers. Some blamed security planning. A few even suggested that the entire production had become too ambitious. As midnight approached, frustration reached a breaking point. People had jobs the next morning, flights to catch, families waiting at home, transportation schedules disappearing by the hour. What was supposed to be an evening concert had now become an overnight commitment. And yet something strange happened. Instead of leaving, most people stayed. The crowd remained. The anticipation remained. The belief remained. Because deep down, everyone understood that they weren't waiting for an ordinary artist. They were waiting for Jay-Z. That distinction would prove critical around the music industry. Reputation is often discussed in terms of chart positions, streaming numbers, and ticket sales. But there's another kind of reputation that matters just as much. Trust. The belief that when a certain artist takes the stage, the experience will be worth whatever it took to get there. Few performers possess that level of trust. Jay-Z does. For decades, he has built an image of excellence. Fans have come to expect a certain standard from him. That reputation became the event's lifeline. Even as frustration grew, many attendees continued believing that if Jay-Z eventually appeared, he would make the wait worthwhile. Still, nobody could have predicted what happened next. When the show finally began after midnight, the atmosphere inside Yankee Stadium transformed almost instantly. The frustration didn't disappear because people forgot about the delays. It disappeared because something larger took its place. Relief, energy, disbelief, excitement. The moment the music started, the entire emotional equation changed. People who had spent hours complaining suddenly found themselves screaming lyrics. Fans who had considered leaving were now standing on seats. Thousands of strangers who had endured the same chaotic experience became part of a shared moment. And that was the first major twist in the story. The chaos that should have destroyed the event actually amplified it. Had the concert started on time, it likely would have been remembered as a great performance. But because of everything that happened beforehand, it became something else entirely, an experience, a survival story, a collective memory. The audience wasn't simply watching a show anymore. They felt like participants in a historic event. Every minute after midnight seemed surreal. The city around them was asleep. Office workers would soon be waking up. Subway schedules had become uncertain. The outside world felt distant. Yet inside Yankee Stadium, thousands of people remained fully engaged. The later it became, the more unreal the atmosphere felt. That environment created something almost impossible to manufacture intentionally. Exclusivity. Not the kind that comes from expensive tickets. The kind that comes from shared experience. Everyone present knew they were witnessing something unusual. Something that could never be perfectly recreated. Something that would sound unbelievable when described later. And then Jay-Z began delivering. Song after song. Era after era. Classic after classic. Instead of showing signs of fatigue, he appeared energized by the moment. The delay had increased pressure dramatically. Had he delivered an average performance, criticism would have dominated headlines. But he didn't give people an average performance. He gave them a marathon. That performance changed the narrative completely. What had begun as a story about organizational failure was rapidly becoming a story about artistic triumph. Journalists who were prepared to write about disaster suddenly had a different story. Fans who entered the venue angry began posting praise. Videos spread across social media showing enormous crowd reactions. Discussion shifted away from what had gone wrong and toward what was happening on stage. In real time, the event was being rewritten. This is where the conflict expanded beyond the stadium itself. Because the industry wasn't just watching a concert, it was watching a lesson. The lesson was uncomfortable. For years, much of the music business has been obsessed with youth, trends, and viral moments. Conventional wisdom suggested that older artists should gradually step aside, that nostalgia acts could still make money but rarely drive culture, that the future belonged exclusively to newer generations. Jay-Z was challenging that assumption, not through interviews, not through social media posts, through action. A 50-plus-year-old rapper had just held tens of thousands of people captive deep into the morning hours, not because of controversy, not because of scandal, because of music, because of performance, because of presence. That realization represented the first true turning point of the entire Yankee Stadium run. The delays created conflict. The performance created redemption. And together they produced something much bigger than either element could have achieved alone. By the time the crowd settled into the rhythm of the show, the narrative had completely flipped. What should have been remembered as a disaster was becoming legendary. What looked like a failure was turning into a triumph. And what started as one of the most chaotic nights in recent concert history was evolving into the foundation of a story that would soon have the entire hip-hop world talking. Because the biggest surprise wasn't that Jay-Z survived the chaos. The biggest surprise was that he somehow used it to make the moment even bigger. And that was only the beginning. If the first twist of the story was that Jay-Z managed to turn chaos into momentum, then what happened next is what transformed the entire event from a memorable concert into a potential turning point for hip-hop itself. Because once the crowd settled in and the performance found its rhythm, it became clear that this wasn't simply a superstar running through a greatest hits set. Jay-Z was making a statement, and the deeper the night went, the louder that statement became. Most legacy artists approach anniversary shows the same way. They celebrate the past. They perform the classics. They remind fans why those records mattered. Then the night ends, and everyone goes home feeling nostalgic. That wasn't what was happening here. Instead, Jay-Z was constructing something much bigger. Every song selection, every guest appearance, every transition between eras felt like another piece of a larger message. The audience came expecting a celebration of history. What they received was a demonstration of power. Not power in the traditional sense. Not chart power. Not streaming power. Cultural power. The kind of influence that cannot be measured by algorithms. The kind that only a handful of artists in music history have ever possessed. As the set list expanded deeper into the night, one thing became impossible to ignore. Jay-Z wasn't merely revisiting his catalog. He was moving effortlessly between different generations of hip-hop, as though they all belonged to the same moment. 1 minute, he was performing records that helped define the late 1990s. The next minute, he was jumping into songs from the 2000s. Then suddenly, he was touching records connected to the 2010s. Most artists struggle to keep audiences engaged across one era of their career. Jay-Z was commanding attention across nearly 30 years of music. That realization hit people in real time. The crowd wasn't reacting out of nostalgia alone. They were reacting because the song still felt relevant, still alive, still powerful. And that's when the larger industry problem began revealing itself. For years, the music business has operated under the assumption that hip-hop moves too fast for long-term dominance. New artists emerge constantly. Trends change overnight. Sounds evolve rapidly. The accepted belief has always been that nobody can remain at the center of the culture forever. Yet standing inside Yankee Stadium, that theory suddenly looked a lot weaker. Because Jay-Z wasn't acting like someone preserving a legacy. He looked like someone extending it. Then came the guest appearances. And this is where the shocking reveal truly started to unfold. One by one, major figures emerged throughout the night. Not minor names. Not random celebrities. Actual stars. Icons. Artists who could headline major venues on their own. Each appearance generated excitement. But together they revealed something much more significant. Nobody in hip-hop possesses a network like Jay-Z. Think about what that means for a moment. The music industry is built on relationships. Careers rise and fall based on partnerships, alliances, respect, and influence. Many artists have friends. Many artists have collaborators. Very few artists can bring together multiple generations of superstars and make it feel natural. Yet, that is exactly what happened. The stage became a living map of Jay-Z's impact on music. Different eras, different styles, different careers, all connected through one central figure. And that was a reveal hidden beneath the spectacle. The guests weren't the story. Jay-Z was. Their presence wasn't proof that he needed help. Their presence was proof of how much influence he still commands. In many ways, the event functioned like a public display of industry loyalty, a reminder of how many major careers have intersected with his own, a reminder that when Jay-Z calls, people still answer. For some observers, that realization was more impressive than the performance itself. Because while streams can be manipulated and trends can be manufactured, respect cannot. Respect has to be earned. And the amount of respect visible on that stage was staggering. Then another realization began spreading among fans and commentators. This wasn't feeling like the end of something. It felt like the beginning. That might sound strange considering the concerts were built around celebrating classic material. Normally, anniversary events signal closure, a chance to honor the past, a final victory lap. But the energy surrounding these performances suggested something very different. The confidence, the ambition, the scale, none of it resembled a farewell. Instead, it resembled a launch. Fans immediately started asking questions. Why now? Why such a massive production? Why this level of attention? Why these particular moments? Why these specific messages? The speculation exploded almost instantly. Some believed a new album announcement was inevitable. Others predicted a larger creative rollout. Some even suggested that Jay-Z was preparing for the biggest late career run hip-hop has ever seen. Whether those theories proved true remains to be seen. But what matters is that people are discussing them at all, because that alone represents a dramatic shift. Before these concerts, much of the conversation around Jay-Z focused on his legacy. After these concerts, people started discussing his future. That's a huge difference. Most artists spend their later years defending what they've already accomplished. Jay-Z somehow managed to convince people that his biggest moves may still be ahead of him. And that's where the industry discomfort begins. Because a Jay-Z can still generate this level of excitement after 3 decades, it challenges many assumptions about how hip-hop careers are supposed to work. It challenges the idea that relevance has an expiration date. It challenges the idea that veteran artists must gradually surrender the spotlight. Most importantly, it challenges the idea that experience is less valuable than novelty. The industry thrives on the next big thing. Jay-Z just reminded everyone of the power of the last big thing that never stopped being important. That realization may be the most significant consequence of the entire event. Not the attendance, not the delays, not the headlines. The message, a message that became clearer with every passing hour. Hip-hop is no longer a young genre trying to prove itself. It now has living legends capable of commanding global attention decades into their careers. And Jay-Z may have just provided the strongest example yet. By the time the night finally approached its conclusion, the conversation had evolved far beyond the concert itself. People weren't simply discussing what they had witnessed. They were discussing what it meant for legacy artists, what it meant for touring, what it meant for hip-hop's future, and most importantly, what it meant for Jay-Z. Because hidden inside the chaos, hidden inside the celebration, and hidden inside the spectacle was a revelation that few people expected to see so clearly. Jay-Z wasn't returning to remind the world who he was. He was reminding the world who he still is. And that revelation may end up being more powerful than any song performed that night. The moment the final lights went down at Yankee Stadium, the conversation exploded. What had started as a concert immediately became a debate, not just among fans, not just among hip-hop media, across the entire music industry. Because depending on who you asked, Jay-Z had either delivered one of the greatest live hip-hop experiences ever created, or exposed a set of uncomfortable truths that many people in the business weren't ready to confront. And that's exactly why the reactions became so intense. For fans who were actually inside the stadium, the overwhelming feeling was disbelief. Many attendees described the event less as a concert and more as an experience. Social media platforms were flooded with videos, reactions, personal stories, and emotional testimonials from people who had witnessed the show firsthand. Even those who openly admitted that the delays were frustrating often ended up saying the same thing. Once Jay-Z took the stage, everything changed. People who had spent hours complaining suddenly found themselves praising the performance. People who had threatened to leave stayed until the very end. And people who initially viewed the night as a disaster began calling it legendary. The reason was simple. The performance delivered. In an era where expectations are constantly inflated by marketing campaigns and social media hype, actually exceeding expectations has become incredibly difficult. Yet, that is exactly what many attendees believe had happened. Fans weren't just talking about the songs. They were talking about the atmosphere, the timing, the guests, the emotion, the feeling of being part of something that could never be recreated exactly the same way again. That sentiment quickly spread beyond the stadium. Clips from the event started circulating across the internet. Hip-hop pages posted highlights. Music commentators uploaded reactions. Podcasts dedicated entire segments to breaking down what had happened. And with every passing hour, one narrative became stronger. Jay-Z had reminded people why he remains one of the most respected figures in music. But while fans were celebrating, the industry's reaction was far more complicated. Because underneath all the praise was a growing realization that this event represented something much bigger than a successful concert. It represented competition. The music business is driven by attention. Every artist is fighting for it. Every label is chasing it. Every promoter is trying to capture it. And for several days, Jay-Z dominated the conversation. Not through controversy, not through scandal, not through manufactured drama, through performance. That distinction matters. Modern music culture often revolves around viral moments rather than musical moments. Headlines are frequently generated by social media arguments, public feuds, shocking interviews, and online controversy. Jay-Z achieved the opposite. He captured attention through artistry. And that may have been the most disruptive part of all, because it reminded audiences that great performances still matter. For many industry executives, the event became a case study. How does an artist who rarely releases music generate this level of excitement? How does someone in his mid-50s dominate headlines in a genre that has historically celebrated youth? How does a veteran performer create more anticipation than many artists currently topping streaming charts? Those questions don't have easy answers, and that's precisely why they made people uncomfortable. The traditional industry model depends on constant replacement. New stars emerge, older stars fade. The cycle repeats. Jay-Z's Yankee Stadium run challenged that formula. Instead of fading into background, he expanded his influence. Instead of becoming a historical figure, he became a current event, and that forced many people to rethink assumptions they had accepted for years. Meanwhile, fellow artists were paying attention as well. Not necessarily because they were jealous, because they were studying. Great performers recognize greatness. When someone creates a moment that captures the culture, other artists notice. Many younger rappers grew up listening to Jay-Z. Some built their careers using strategies he helped popularize. Others openly cite him as an influence. Watching him command a stadium after 3 decades in the game sent a powerful message. Longevity is possible. Relevance is possible. Evolution is possible. For artists hoping to build careers that last beyond a few years, that lesson may have been just as important as the music itself. Of course, not everyone was impressed. Every major cultural event generates criticism. Some observers focus on logistical failures. Others argue that the delays overshadowed the performance. Some question whether the event would receive the same level of praise if a younger artist had experienced similar problems. A few critics suggested that nostalgia played a major role in the audience reaction. These criticisms weren't entirely unreasonable. The delays were real. The confusion was real. The frustration experienced by thousands of attendees was real. But even many critics found themselves facing a difficult reality. The conversation kept returning to the show itself. Despite the chaos, people couldn't stop talking about what happened once the music started. And that may be the strongest indication of how powerful performance actually was. Normally, logistical failures become the dominant story. Here, they became a footnote. The show overwhelmed the controversy. That doesn't happen often. Even music journalists seem divided. Some focus on the organizational problems. Others focus on the historic nature of the performance. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. This was not an ordinary concert. Whether viewed positively or negatively, it had become impossible to ignore. Perhaps the most interesting reaction came from within hip-hop culture itself. For years, debates about the greatest rapper of all time have remained unresolved. Different generations support different artists. Different fans value different qualities. Some prioritize lyricism. Others prioritize influence. Others prioritize commercial success. Those arguments will never completely disappear. But after Yankee Stadium, many people felt that Jay-Z had strengthened his position in that conversation. Not because he released a new classic album. Not because he broke a sales record. Because he demonstrated mastery of the stage. Because he showed that decades of experience still matter. Because he proved that greatness isn't only measured by what an artist creates, but also by what they can still do. And perhaps that's the reaction that matters most. The event changed how people viewed possibility. Fans saw what a legacy artist could achieve. Artists saw what a long career could look like. Executives saw a different model for cultural relevance. Promoters saw the value of creating experiences rather than simply booking concerts. The public saw a legend operating at an elite level. And the industry saw something even more significant. A reminder that true influence cannot be manufactured. It must be earned over decades. As reactions continued pouring in, one conclusion became increasingly difficult to avoid. Regardless of where someone stood on Jay-Z, regardless of how they felt about the delays, and regardless of how they ranked the performance among other historic shows, one fact remained undeniable. The entire music world was talking about it. And in an attention economy where relevance disappears overnight, that alone is an extraordinary achievement, which is exactly why the reactions mattered so much. They weren't merely responses to a concert. They were responses to a statement. A statement that Jay-Z was far from finished. And a statement that the rest of the industry could no longer afford to ignore. At this point, the story sounds complete. A legendary rapper celebrates his legacy. A massive concert experiences chaos. The artist overcomes the problems. The crowd witnesses a historic performance. The industry reacts. End of story. Except it isn't. Because the biggest takeaway from Jay-Z's Yankee Stadium run may have nothing to do with the concerts themselves. It may have everything to do with what happens next. And that's where the final twist changes everything. Throughout the entire run of shows, there was an underlying feeling that something bigger was happening beneath the surface. The performances were being marketed as celebrations of classic albums and historic milestones, but the energy surrounding them felt different from a normal anniversary event. Most artists look backward during legacy celebrations. Jay-Z seemed to be looking forward. That distinction matters a lot. When artists reach a certain stage in their careers, the conversation usually shifts from future achievements to past accomplishments. Fans start discussing influence rather than innovation, legacy rather than evolution, history rather than possibility. But after these performances, the conversation suddenly moved in the opposite direction. People weren't asking whether Jay-Z's legacy was secure. Everyone already knew it was. Instead, they started asking a completely different question. Why now? Why invest this much energy, attention, and cultural capital into a series of events unless there was something larger being built? The more people thought about it, the more unusual the timing began to feel. Jay-Z is one of the most strategic figures in modern entertainment. For decades, nearly every major movie is made has been calculated, intentional, and connected to a broader vision. That's why fans immediately started looking for clues. And the clues were everywhere. The confidence on stage, the carefully crafted rollout, the massive guest appearances, the public visibility, the renewed engagement with hip-hop culture. None of it felt random. None of it felt accidental. Most importantly, none of it felt like a farewell. In fact, it felt like the exact opposite. It felt like preparation. That realization has fueled an enormous wave of speculation. Could a new album be coming? Possibly. Could a larger tour be in development? Maybe. Could Jay-Z be preparing for a creative run unlike anything we've seen from him in years? Many fans certainly think so. Now, to be clear, there's been no official confirmation that any of those things are happening. But here's the important part. People are talking about them as realistic possibilities, and that alone represents a remarkable shift. Before these shows, discussions about Jay-Z often centered on his business ventures, his influence, and his status as a cultural icon. After these shows, people began discussing him as an active competitor again. That's a completely different conversation. Suddenly, younger artists weren't being compared to the Jay-Z of 20 years ago. They were being compared to the Jay-Z standing on stage right now. And that comparison creates a fascinating problem for the industry. Because if Jay-Z decides to become fully active again, the landscape changes. Think about what that means. This is not simply another veteran artist releasing music. This is someone with one of the most respected catalogs in hip-hop history. Someone with unmatched industry relationships. Someone capable of generating global headlines with a single appearance. Someone who can command attention from multiple generations simultaneously. Very few artists possess that combination of advantages. In many ways, Jay-Z occupies a category entirely his own. And that brings us to the final twist. The real story may not be that Jay-Z changed hip-hop history. The real story may be that he reminded everyone that he still has the power to shape its future. That's a much bigger development. History is something you inherit. The future is something you influence. During these performances, Jay-Z demonstrated that his influence remains enormous, not just among fans, not just among media outlets, across the entire culture. For years, people have debated who currently runs hip-hop, streaming giants, social media stars, chart-topping newcomers, regional movements. Different generations have offered different answers. Yet for one extraordinary stretch of time, the conversation belonged almost entirely to Jay-Z, and he earned it the old-fashioned way, through performance, through presence, through excellence. That may be the most important lesson from the entire saga. In an era dominated by algorithms, engagement metrics, and viral trends, Jay-Z reminded everyone that cultural gravity still exists. Some artists don't chase attention. Attention follows them. That's exactly what happened here. Even the chaos became part of the mythology. Even the delays became part of the narrative. Even the controversy ended up feeding the legend. By the end of it all, people weren't discussing what went wrong. They were discussing what it meant. And perhaps that's the clearest sign that something significant occurred. Great concerts entertain. Historic moments create questions. This event created a lot of questions. Questions about the future of live hip-hop. Questions about legacy artists. Questions about cultural influence. Questions about Jay-Z himself. But one question stands above all the others. What if this was only the beginning? What if Yankee Stadium wasn't the destination? What if it was the launch pad? Because when you look back at some of the biggest moments in music history, they often seem obvious in hindsight. At the time, they feel like celebrations. Years later, we realize they were introductions, the beginning of a new chapter disguised as the ending of an old one. That's why the industry is paying such close attention right now. Not because of what Jay-Z accomplished, because of what he might accomplish next. And if these performances were truly the opening move in a larger plan, then hip-hop may have witnessed something much bigger than a legendary concert run. It may have witnessed a return of one of the most powerful forces the genre has ever produced. Which leaves us with one final question. Was Yankee Stadium the moment Jay-Z cemented his legacy? Or was it the moment he started writing his next chapter? Because if the answer is the second one, then the rest of the industry has every reason to be paying attention. And the biggest story may still be ahead of us. But now I want to hear from you. After everything we've talked about, the chaos, the delays, the historic performances, the incredible guest appearances, and the message that Jay-Z sent to the entire music industry, what do you think? Did Jay-Z just put on one of the greatest hip-hop shows of all time? Did this Yankee Stadium run actually change the way we'll look at legacy artists moving forward? Or do you think people are getting caught up in the moment and exaggerating what really happened? Drop your thoughts down in the comments, because this is one of those events that's going to be debated for years. I genuinely think we're going to look back on these shows as a major turning point in hip-hop history. But I want to know where you stand. And let's talk about the biggest question of all. Do you believe this was simply a celebration of Jay-Z's past? Or was it the beginning of something much bigger? Could a new album be on the way? Could there be another massive run of performances coming? Or was this Jay-Z's way of reminding everyone that he still has unmatched influence over the culture whenever he decides to step into the spotlight? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel reach more hip-hop fans who love deep dives into the biggest stories in music. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss future videos, because we're going to be covering every major development, every rumor, every announcement, and every historic moment happening across the world of hip-hop. And finally, thank you for watching all the way to the end. The support means more than you know, and we've got a lot more incredible stories, breakdowns, and discussions coming very soon. Until next time, stay safe, stay passionate about the music, and remember, hip-hop history is still being written, and sometimes we're lucky enough to watch it happen in real time.